Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Change Management version 3, What's Changed? My name's Etty, I'm the Content Marketing Executive at ILX. We'll just give it another minute or so for a few more people to join, and then I'll be handing over to Andy here, who's one of our expert change management trainers, who's going to take you through the presentation today. So while we're just waiting, I've got a couple of housekeeping bits that I'd just like to cover. So firstly, you'll notice that you're all on mute. Please do remain on mute throughout the session. It just means that everything's a little bit clearer. You can all hear Andy nicely, and yeah, that will keep everything running smoothly. If you do have any questions as we go through, there's a question box on the side, and you'll notice that you can sort of type those in there. If they're technical questions, then I'll be in the background answering those throughout. So if you can't see us, hear us, things like that. But otherwise, we will be running a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So we'll get to any questions about the content at that point. The webinar is being recorded. That's a very common question we get asked. So you'll be able to watch that back on YouTube, and we'll be sending out an email tomorrow with a link to that recording in it, so you can share and watch it back whenever you would like. We also like to say give us a follow on social media. We're active on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, as well as YouTube, which I just mentioned. And finally, today's session is going to take sort of about 30 to 40 minutes presentation wise. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be time for a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Andy, and he'll be taking you through today.
Thanks, Etty. Morning, everybody. As it says, I'm Andy West, Senior Training Consultant here at ILX. I'm a project and change management trainer of just a few years experience as we go through, and I'll be walking you through the change, what it is and what it's all about as we go through. So what are we going to cover? First off, what is change management? Why has it been updated? What hasn't changed? What has been updated, what's been included now it wasn't there before, and some study options. How might you go about studying this particular course? And then, of course, deal with any questions that you have as we go through. So my starting point here is, well, what's a project? Okay. All the definitions of a project talk about being a unique process. Okay. Coordinated, controlled activities, start finish, conforming to specific requirements. There's from the body of knowledge. Temporary organization structure, delivering one or more business products. And so the focus on project management is very much on the output. What is the thing you are delivering? But when you look at the purpose of projects, the purpose is change. And so the important question here is well, how and when does the change happen? So a project will deliver an output, a thing, a capability, whether it's a new system, a new process, a new organization structure, piece of technology. It's a thing. And at the end of that project, what we're going to do is we're going to hand it over to the business as usual, the frontline users, the people who are actually going to use that item. And importantly, this is where the business change happens. It's about the adoption of that output into operational use. And of course, once that happens, we achieve the outcome. We are faster, we are smarter, we are shinier, we are compliant, whatever the purpose of this particular change is. And we measure that as benefits. And so the crucial bit here is the business change bit, the adoption of the output, the capability by your community, by your colleagues. And so the question to ask is, does everybody want to change? And of course, the answer is not always. So when we start to look at kind of projects and change and things that happen, change actually happens when we deliver the right capability, the thing that people have actually wanted. They have the ability to use it. So have they been trained? Do they have the knowledge? Have we updated the kind of process details to support those things? Perhaps more importantly, the willingness. Are they willing to do this? And so capability, right output. Ability is all about stakeholders and change and training and learning, which is a crucial part of, engagement with people as we go through. And finally, we have the kind of stakeholders, the change, the willingness. And so when we start to look at projects and change management is an entirely kind of complementary skill for the project managers. It's the people side of projects, okay? Particularly in the past, if we've had project managers who are technical experts, we've been promoted into that role because we know all about that particular area, all about that particular thing. Our focus is going to be on the capability. It's, are we building the right solution in the right way with all the technical kind of accoutrements that come with that? And we stick with our kind of comfort zone. I know all about the capability. But there's this big other area of people, stakeholder engagement. And so when you look at project management, there's a whole field that we need to consider that says, well, are we doing the people stuff? Are we looking after those? Now, if you look at some of the early models of project management, then it just said, we're going to do stakeholder engagement. We're going to communicate. And of course, it can be far more than that. It's a far broader area about understanding what's going on. And it's to look at all of the different sorts of things that you might consider. Let's say, well, how do I get people going, no, I don't want to change, to, all right, I'll give it a go. And of course, depending on the nature of your organization, do you work in an organization that's doing lots of change and therefore people are used to it and therefore there's a good deal more willingness to change? It's much easier to do so because we do this sort of thing regularly. Do you work in an organization where there's been less change, where change is not quite so common? In which case you might find that the resistance to change and the difficulty that people have is far greater. And so it's thinking about all of those sorts of areas. Are we enabling people to learn appropriately? Are we dealing with their objections, their concerns, their fears about the change? If I give you a quick example, one of the previous organizations I worked with did change regularly, but generally it was shuffling people around. So it was very much a sales-driven environment. And so every year the sales team is reorganized to deal with the new external market. And therefore administration, where I worked, is then reorganized to support the sales team in the appropriate way. And that happened every year. And therefore, when it came around, people looked forward to it and went, well, it's an opportunity to go and work in a different area or support a different sales team or learn a different set of skills or maybe go for a promotion if we're doing those sorts of changes. And it was seen as an acceptable thing. And as an organization, we did it every year and therefore we could do it efficiently because the people side of that change is understood and people accepted it. The last change I impacted when I worked there, and this is actually when I left the organization, was the decision to shut the offices where I worked, the one in the north of England, and move all the roles to the head office in the south of England. Now, this wasn't the normal sort of change that we dealt with. This wasn't the sort of, it's shuffling around, it's an opportunity. It's, well, do I want to move to West London? Can I afford to move to West London? Does my family want to move there? Do I have any family down there? And suddenly all of these questions arose. Now, the organisation assumed that we were all loyal and therefore, a lot of us were going to move. And in the end, less than 10% of people moved. And therefore, the change, the benefits they expected from this, consolidation of administration staff at the head office, didn't appear for a huge long time. They expected that the change to be over and all that transition process to be over in 7 months and achieving benefits afterwards. I lost contact with people in the organisation because I left about 4 years afterwards. And the organisation still wasn't back to the previous operating effectiveness that it had before that particular change. And so understanding stakeholders' reactions to the change and the different sorts of changes that might happen in your organisation can be hugely important in making this work, because you've got to understand the people and their motivations and all the things that go with us being awkward and basically human. So it's looking at that kind of purpose. That's where it's important. Interestingly, the two other main project management frameworks covered here in the UK, the APM framework and PeopleCert's Prince 2 framework, have been updated in the last 18 months to include change management in much greater detail, rather than just, oh, let's go and communicate with the stakeholders. They have now introduced elements of change management. So the Prince 2 model now starts to include a small element on change impact and how important it is, and the people part side of projects. In the APM framework, when we start to look at the project management qualification, they've introduced an area called transition management, which is all about stakeholder impact analysis and understanding the size of the change and what we might need to do to move them forwards. Both of those include that kind of impact analysis, and so it's important to understand how big the change is and how much people are impacted, and therefore what we need to do is move those people forward. What they don't include is all the tools and techniques that are included in change management. So they're starting to agree this is a hugely important area for project managers and effective change in organizations. And they have the starting point, an impact analysis. How big is this change and how much does it affect the people impacted by this change? And let's consider how much work we need to do to move people forward. What they don't cover is the syllabus I'm going to show you later on today, kind of the skills, the knowledge that you need to be effective change managers in an organization to make it work. So the big question here is, well, why update? What's the purpose in all of this? Well, it's part of being in the real world. If I look at a timeline for change management, it's been here since 2005. The Change Management Institute, which has dual heads, one here in the UK and one in Australia, very much has been in existence since 2005. There's been a recognition for 20 years that actually this is a complementary skill and it needs a set of skills, and we need to think different from kind of a technical focus. It needs that people focus kind of area. The first qualification was launched back in 2007, and that was based on a book about making change management effective by two writers, Cameron and Green. And covered a series of tools and techniques that they picked up as consultants in the project management and the change environment to help understand how we do change effectively. 2013, the Change Management Institute actually produced a body of knowledge. All the things a change manager needs to understand to be effective in the world of change. And based on that, the APMG, who are the exam board who work with the Change Management Institute, produced version 2 of this qualification. And they launched a book called the Effective Change Manager's Handbook, which was quite a large book, which covered the whole syllabus of the change management course, plus a lot more other information, supporting information, things you might consider. So it was far bigger, far broader than the qualification itself. When people received their first copy of that handbook, they were always a little concerned looking at the size of it. And so part of dealing with that, the people management side, was we don't have to study everything in that book. The syllabus will help you walk through the key elements. 9 years after the first launch of the body of knowledge, the world has moved on. We've learnt more. And the Change Management Institute launched an updated version of the body of knowledge, looking at some of the later research that's going forwards. And then based on that, we have the new version, Change Management version 3. There's a study guide which covers purely the syllabus and nothing extra, so it's considerably smaller than the original handbook. It's focused on covering the latest things, the latest updates, the latest thinking about change as we go through. So quite simply, why change? Well, it's quite simply about evolution. We've learned more in the 20 years that the Institute has been involved in change and looking at change about how people motivated, how do they think about this? What sort of tools and techniques might we use? There's developments in the theory and the practice of how we do it. When we start to look at things like program management, the introduction of business change managers, who very much, this is their role. It's the complementary side. So project managers can focus on the technical, and they can focus on the people side. Of course, if you're not part of a program, that still needs to be done, and therefore becomes this complementary skill for project managers, as well as, if you like, change managers embedded in the business, making sure that these things are being done. The writers behind some of the theories have updated their models to make them more of this century, to take it away from being a kind of simple step-by-step process to being much more iterative type of process as we go through. And of course, there's more research and there's more observations. And more organizations are thinking about change management and therefore are starting to pick up, how do we do it? How do we make it work? What kind of roles do we really need? What are the key important things about change as we go through? And one of the things you may have noticed, if you're involved in projects and organizational change in any sense, is the sheer amount of change and the pace of change we're expected to do. At the start of the century, there was a lot of kind of traditional projects where the output comes through at the end. But at that point, of course, introducing kind of agile development becomes a much more popular methodology. What that means is we need to be ready for change after the first sprint, the first time box, which could be in 4 weeks' time. Are we ready for something to go live? Or more importantly, are our people ready for more things to go live as we go through? So it's to consider that kind of environment that we work in as project and change managers. It's to consider what's actually going on in the world, and therefore how much change do we need to cope with. You've probably seen all of that. So let's do a comparison. The old course was fit into 4 broad syllabus areas. We have changing the individual, changing the organization, communication and stakeholder engagement, and change management practice. So we start to look at change in the organization, things like the change curve. How do people react to change? So if you're familiar with the Kubler-Ross curve, it's using those and looking at the kind of the 7 steps of that and how we might manage transition. So some theory about learning. How do we enable people to learn? Notice it's the focus on learning. What do they need rather than what do we do as trainers? What do we do to kind of deliver training? It's what are their needs in terms of learning. What's the best way of doing this? Motivation. Now, interestingly, project management courses have always talked about motivation, like motivating the team. What do I hear is, how do I motivate the users, the customers, to use the output we're going to deliver? Interestingly, in an organization, of course, you might have direct access to do this. If you're trying to change the behaviors of customers, of external people, it's how do we go around doing those sorts of things? And it gives you a much, much broader view of what's going on. And of course, resistance to change. Why do people resist? What sort of symptoms of resistance might you see? And what you might do to kind of mitigate it? Changing the organization. What sort of organization do we have? What sort of models of change are there? And they're particularly focused on 3 models in there, which are carried forward into the new ones we go through. The key roles. How do we deal with culture? Those of you who study strategic planning, I think one of the quotes actually says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you're trying to do something as a strategy which doesn't meet with the culture of the organization, essentially the culture of the organization will just ignore it. To which change managers added, a strategy has change as a light snack mid-morning. If we're trying to deliver a change that doesn't fit in with the culture of our organization, it's not going to work. And therefore, we need to start thinking about, do I need to change the culture first? Do I need to change the emphasis of how the organization works so that the change we're proposing is acceptable? We look at the strategic context of where it fits, things about vision and trying to achieve those, and how we might deliver change. Communication and stakeholder engagement kind of comes to the fore. It's the tools and techniques we might consider for understanding stakeholders, who they are, how we analyze them. I'm particularly looking at the tools and techniques for communication, engagement, facilitation, which becomes a key skill for the change manager to ensure that when we're dealing with people, we can facilitate events to get them on side. And then change impact. What's the impact on the organization? What's the impact on the stakeholders? How ready we are as an organization for the changes? How do we keep it going? And how do we make sure we've got the right team of people actually looking after the change and helping our organization through it? All of these are sorts of things you go, well, they kind of make sense. And when we start to look at the new syllabus, a lot of that is going to be carried forward. So the new organisation syllabus is actually into 5 areas now. So if organisational context and approach, how do we go around change? What's the organisation? What are we trying to achieve? How do we want to go about doing change? We've got people and change. We'll pick up lots of things I've kind of talked about already. Change leadership and teams. So focusing on the leadership of change and the team effectiveness. Stakeholder communication goes without saying. And then the work of the change manager. Specific things about kind of sustaining change and keeping things going. And the course is structured in those 5 elements, which if you're on the course, you would go through in those kind of 5 chunks. And they are meet with what's in the study guide. So the support manual works in the same groupings and goes through the same kind of areas. So in terms of consistency, for those who may have done these sorts of things before. So under the people and change areas, things about kind of people, we've got the roles, we've got the learning theory, still in there because they're still hugely important about understanding what do we do and how do we do it. Teams and team development, human motivations, critical things we've always dealt with. Stakeholder engagement communication, very similar to what was in the previous version, just updated to reflect the changing world as we go through. Changing impact assessments, the resistance to change, sustaining change, key things are always part of change management practice, the role of the change manager, the work of the change manager to ensure that they're still in there. So a lot of things have been carried forward with some updates, with some amendments as we go through. If I look at what's new then, critically, the organisational approaches, the organisational context and our approaches to change. This has been updated considerably because one of the key things that the previous syllabus always covered was, if I like, the theory and background. How do we think about change? How do we go about change? How do we decide what we're going to go and do? What it didn't really give was an approach, a structure, a way of doing it. And so many organizations, when they're looking at change, want to consider, well, what sort of structure should I use? Process for doing this? What sort of framework should I use? And so an updated section on how, as an organization, you might put process in place. And then, of course, what you do is you hang all of the other skills and theories off of that process to give you a structure. This is what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. It reflects a number of different structures you might use. The focus on co-design. And this is really about the approach taken to build a solution using the input of all of the impacted people to make sure that all parties who are impacted have a voice in what we're going to do. And this is a hugely important part of getting buy-in. For those who've worked in projects and change, if you've encountered a change has been kind of forced on you, we're going to tell you what's good for you. You've probably experienced the serious amount of resistance of, that's not what I need, that doesn't work for me. And the idea of co-design is to involve people in the design of the solution, skin in the game essentially, and therefore greater acceptance. My needs are being addressed as we go through. And that feeds into the continuous change cycle. A reflection that change is a continuous thing. It's not something we do once and forget. It's something that's happening all the time. Given the pressures on an organization, given the change in environment and the speed of change, co-design, understanding the thing, putting solutions in, adopting those, getting those working, and moving on to the next change. And so as organizations, we're doing this on a regular, repeatable basis, and reflects lots of the kind of agile ideas of the kind of repetitive nature of doing these sorts of things. So it may be a bigger change. It may be that the change is actually being built in a linear way, but there's another change following on. And of course, this has a huge impact on organizations and your culture and how you work. And are we ready for those sorts of things? And so the idea of change readiness and building that kind of change capability is still at the heart of this process. It's still at the heart of understanding how we're going to go and do it. And that's part of organizational change or development. Are we ready for change? Do we understand how change is going to work? And are we picking up all of those kind of elements? Some of the new things added into the work of the project manager, the work of the change manager rather. Change analytics. What data are you collecting? Where are you now? What do you understand about your performance? What things do you measure to show how change is working? What's your progress about change? And then what are we measuring to show the effectiveness of change? So change analytics is looking at all of that kind of data handling, understanding. You know, where are we now? How well are we performing? What are we measuring in terms of progress and success as we go through? And look at the importance of both kind of qualitative and quantitative data in that environment. Coaching. Now, this was previously mentioned in the handbook, but was not part of the syllabus. This has now been brought in to the fore because this is going to be a key skill for change managers. It's to identify what skills people need and how do we go around making sure that we develop those skills. And so as a change manager, you may be coaching change agents, you may be coaching sponsors, you may be coaching individuals as you go through the change. So what sort of framework should you use? How should you do it? And to ensure that you're going to go do this. And similarly, conflict. Of course, in the previous syllabus, it talked about resistance and resistance to change and having a kind of resistance management strategy. And so looking for things like disengagement and audible unhappiness and perhaps even sabotage. But bringing in handling conflict, what it gives is one, looking for the sources of conflict, so similar to the kind of resources of resistance. And then strategies. How might we manage conflict in these particular circumstances? What is an appropriate way forward? And so looking at the general techniques we need as leaders of change to ensure that we can manage that conflict and resolve it as we go through. And so some key elements to add value to what was in there as we went through already, to ensure that all of the elements of change are being considered from the start to the end. And when you start to look at the role of change managers, you can find it starts at the very start of a project, sometimes even beforehand. What is it we actually need? What's the problem? What changes do we need as an organization? And we'll continue afterwards to ensure that the adoption of the output, the capability happens, and that therefore the benefits are being accrued as we go forward as an organization. All of these things are crucial for effective change. Without that, what happens is we deliver the output and people look and go, well, that's not what I asked for. That's not what I expected. And that's particularly where co-design comes in, is I help design that solution, therefore I'm much more likely to use it. So these are the general approaches. It's about moving the syllabus forward. As you can see, it's the third version of this already. It's about dealing with the latest theories, the updates to kind of learning practice and how we might do change. It's from the feedback of the Change Management Institute about what works and what doesn't, being picked up via their body of knowledge, all the things that effective change managers need to understand, which I have to say is broader than the syllabus that's actually being covered in this particular course, because there's lots of other things you might need to consider as well. But these are the core things that help us understand and position our change in our organization in the most effective way. The new syllabus. Well, what can I do about this? Well, based around the syllabus, we offer both Foundation and Practitioner courses. If you have a look at our website, ilelectric.com, you can go there. In terms of study options, well, there's a full range of things that go on here. You can do an e-learning course, fully online, a live virtual, or even a classroom course. Both of those are offered. Or a blended version, where you do a bit of both. Often people find studying the Foundation, they can have it online, but they want to talk to somebody doing the Practitioner. And I always found that I found that a useful way forward for me personally. What works for you as an individual? Again, comes back to learning style. Something in the course itself. How do I prefer to learn? Is it the interactions with people? Is it working with somebody else? Can I study online by myself? Which is the best thought? And to just leave you with this thought about change management in itself. Okay, there's no such thing as a technology project. All projects are about change, and change always includes people. And in my experience, people can always be more awkward than technology. And that's why the role of change and change managers is so important when we start to consider effective changes. Almost to the minute, 30 minutes.
Perfect. Well done. No, that was a great session. Thank you, Andy. So as you can see from the slide on the screen, we're going to take some questions now. So we've had one or two come through so far, but if you do have any questions, please do just pop those in the question box and we will work our way through them. So the first one is there anything about configuration management in the syllabus?
Not in this particular syllabus. That will be covered generally in the more technical side of project management, version control and document control. So you generally find that in the APM qualifications. It's covered much more extensively there than it is in Prince 2, but that's generally part, if you like, the technical part of managing the project. It will still be an important element of this to make sure that all our information is consistent, but it's not specifically covered in there.
Perfect. We've had another one through. This one just says, could too many changes also make people reject change, especially if the previous ones did not go well?
Absolutely. So what you start to get here is change fatigue. It feels like change for change's sake, which are phrases you've probably bumped into once or twice. And what you start to get then is people just going, I can't do with anything more. There's too many changes going on. I don't know where I am at this particular moment in time. And that, of course, breeds into resistance to change and to conflict. And therefore, as an organization, as a change manager, what you have to look at is what's appropriate here. And part of your strategies might be do we need to give a bit more breathing space? So you might start thinking about how you might do that. So it bumps into conflict, it bumps into people's change attitude, how much resistance is there going to be, how angry are they about the changes. So it kind of bumps into lots of different parts of the syllabus, but becomes a critical part to consider when you're planning another change, what else is going on across the organization.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. We've had another one through. It says, how closely linked is change management with benefits management, and does the course cover this at all?
It doesn't specifically cover those things. What we're looking at here is the people side of it. Clearly, the analytics would start to feed into things like benefits, but the course doesn't specifically cover benefits management in itself. That's considered to be a separate subject. And there are many courses that cover those sorts of things. There's a good book by Stephen Jenner, which is the basis of another course on benefits management itself, that would cover those sorts of things. But two of them are related. If we're effective at change, then we're much more likely to achieve the benefits we go through. In fact, one of the early statistics quoted about change management was that if we are effective at change management, then one, we can increase the amount of benefits being achieved, and we can achieve the pace at which they're being achieved. So it has a direct impact because it's about adoption, speed, and sustaining that change. And clearly those two things are critical to benefits management. So there is a link between them.
Yeah. So this one says, what about for those who sort of work within programs, for etc., balancing BAU and working with change for the program, will that raise conflicts and issues?
Well, actually, if we start to look at program management, the program manager is very much about balancing the delivery of the project and the adoption. And if we look at managing successful programs, it suggests the role of a business change manager, and this course absolutely suits that particular role. But importantly, the role of the change manager has the authority, leverage perhaps to go back to the program manager and say, we need to slow things up. The people aren't coping. We need to give them a bit more time. And so it's considered to be a hugely important role in effective program management. So if you're looking at a program management model and you're building program managers, then think about the role of business change managers to make that work. I did some work a number of years ago now with a large council in the West Midlands, and they called these service improvement officers. Essentially, they were people embedded across the organisation whose role was to, well, deal with coaching and those sort of things, but they were essentially business change managers. And so whenever there was a change in their environment, they were part of that change, but they were embedded within the user communities to enable and support change and to provide feedback to program managers about delivery speed and effectiveness. So that can be a hugely important part of implementing programs effectively.
Yeah. We've had a follow-up question to the benefits management one. This just says, could benefits management be an effective way to manage change effectiveness? And if not, sort of how would you recommend measuring that?
If you look at benefits management, the model, really what it says, if I remember some of the pillars of Stephen Jenner's model, says start with benefits, i.e. what do we want to improve? Not what do I want as an organization, it's what do I want to improve, and therefore build a strategy that says, am I providing the right things to achieve those kind of benefits? And it says use effective delivery mechanisms. So have you got a good project management methodology, and do you have an effective change management methodology, linking the two things together? And that way you can start to measure those. So the benefits management frameworks that are in there, particularly Stephen Jenner's one, his Management of Benefits book, starts to focus on the strategic nature of benefits management, and it is a driving force. So starting with the end in mind, starting with what you want to achieve as benefits, and then working back to what you need as a capability. But the people side of that becomes, if you like, the effective delivery capability. Do we have the skills and knowledge to deliver the right thing in the right way and to get it adopted? And so, again, related subjects, benefits will focus on the measurable improvements. This will focus on getting the people to accept the output and therefore generate them. And so it's a kind of link between capability and benefits. Without this, we may not achieve the benefits that we expected to. I think that's the right way of putting it.
Yeah, makes sense. This one says, what is the average frequency needed or required for changes in a big organization?
No, there's an almost impossible. How long is a piece of string? One of the things you have to look at here is in a large organization, and it depends on the amount of pressure on the organization from the outside world. So are you subject to changes in legislation and government policy? Policy being much quicker to change than legislation. Are you subject to the whims of the marketplace and sudden changes in, say, tariffs, or competitor action, or worldwide interactions? What's going on there? Are there big changes in technology going on in your particular area? What sort of technology do you need? And so all of those will start to drive the amount of change that you need. And of course, so will the demands of the organization of where are we going as a vision? What's out now? Where do we want to be in 5 years' time? And how big a gap is there between where we are now and where we want to be? So it's part of that kind of strategic planning process to understand, well, what do we need to change as an organization? And so this comes down from the very top of the organization, says, well, where are we heading? And good analysis of, well, how big is the gap between where we are now and where we're going to go? And if you're in an organization that's not done very much and the world around you is changing rapidly, you might find there's a long list of things that need to be done. If as an organization you've always been regularly doing lots of changes, you might find the gap is slightly smaller. One thing I do feel is that change is not going away. There's always been change, and more things are forcing us to change nowadays. So I think the pace of change is going up. And it's about building capability. Do we understand change? Do we talk about change? One of the things that is always worthwhile considering as an organization, do we talk about change that's happening elsewhere in the organization? So your team might not be changing at the moment, and therefore you're going, it's quite happy, it's all stable here, it's great. But if you notice all the other departments are changing, then sooner or later yours is going to change. There is a theme of change in the organization. If we don't communicate that, it comes as a complete shock. And therefore go, where did that come from? And so are we preparing people? Are we warning them there's going to be change? But let's do it in a good way. If I just give you a quick example of how not to do it. I worked for a water company at one point, and it needed to do quite a lot of change because it had been quite a stable organization. And the managing director was giving a speech, and he gave it a number of times, essentially to every member of staff across the organization. So he ran a series of quite big facilitated events. And he uses a simple model, which was Lewin's model, mentioned in the course, of unfreeze, change, refreeze. And the idea being is that you unfreeze by getting the organization ready for the change. You do the change, and then you refreeze it. We're now in a new place. And we were dealing with a community who hadn't done very much change. And therefore, the idea of refreezing, the change is finished, is very appealing. And in our managing director's original speech, he went, no, we're going to unfreeze, we're going to get you ready for change, we're going to help you change, and then we're going to refreeze, and this is where we're going to be for a bit. Which was brilliant, because people sort of went, there's a comfort zone, this change is going to finish. He then ad-libbed, which perhaps didn't go down very well. He said, I don't really want to refreeze, I want to continue simmering for the next 5 years, which is there's going to be lots of change going on. Now, of course, in that particular community, that ad-lib probably wasn't the best thing to say. It was the truth of what was needed, but actually did create a lot of kind of concern and fear of this is never going to end.
Yeah.
And the truth is, of course, there's always going to be more change around the corner. So you do one and you refreeze one change, but you might be then changing something else. And that is the nature of the continuous change cycle, to ensure that we are thinking in those sorts of terms as an organization.
Yeah. Another one around sort of program management. So this one says program management has tranches of work and is highly infused with program change managers and what the BAU needs. Can you talk about tranches of work and how change affects this?
So one of the things is a tranche is really a slice of a program made up of a group of related projects. At the end of each tranche should be a self-sustaining piece of change. So the change control or the change management process should start before the first project delivery to ensure that the ground is fertile for each project in each tranche. And what you should find is that if the project gets counted at the end of that tranche, then what you've delivered so far should be self. And it may well be that that's one avenue of change. And then we start on the next tranche doing the next piece of work. And so it's important to understand what outputs are we working on at the moment, which slice of the program are we in at the moment, and therefore which change management activities support that particular tranche. And you might find that different slices, different tranches have different change management requirements, depending on who's being changed, what's being changed, the timeline. Some of these things maybe need to be done very quickly. It's software updates every 4 weeks, or even worse, every 2 weeks. Adela got my course many years ago. Every 2 weeks, there's an update. And everybody else in the course went, oh, no. But if you've got that, you've got to prepare people for the fact there's going to be lots of little updates, and therefore they can get rid of one and work on the next. And so you might find that your change management activities will work through the tranches, but you may need different things as you go through, and different amounts of effort depending on the target audience and the size of the change.
Next question says, does it help if the change manager has operational experience of the area being changed, or does it not matter?
Now that's a good one. One of the things here is that when you start to look at models about who's going to be a business change manager, the MSP Managed Successful Programs almost assumes that the change manager is embedded in the environment, is a manager in the part of the organization that's going to be changed. And therefore they have essentially a stake in it because it's their part of the organization, and therefore they need that part of the organization to change. And that would certainly help in terms of having the right kind of network and influence within that particular group. One of the things you find with change managers is if you're not part of that group, you need to build that network quite quickly, because you will need to engage with line managers. You will need to engage with senior management in that particular area. And so if you haven't worked in that area, you need to build that network very early in the change process to understand all those parties that you're concerned with and how you might support them through the process. So if you're already embedded, it probably gives you a kind of running start. If not, you've got to do a lot more work as a change manager up front.
Yeah, makes sense. This next one says, how does change management affect portfolio management and the priority of projects around benefits?
Oh, this. So portfolio management is your strategic planning function. How many projects and programs can we run? Which ones go first and how they're progressing? And of course, what you might do at a portfolio level then is measure benefits. So what there should be here is, as well as starting to look at the technical skills we apply to projects and programs, you can have those technical people to run these projects and deliver the right kind of capability. what we should be thinking about is also change management resources, change management capability. How much change management resource do we need to put into each of those different areas to make sure we don't just deliver the right things, but they're actually adopted? And so this should be part of that almost strategic planning function that says big change, big project and program resource, but also there's an appropriate amount of change management resource to help that process through. Because the proof of portfolio management in the end is we're a successful business and we keep improving, and that's performance management, that's benefits. And so there's a kind of tie in here.
Yeah.
So you might get, delivery mechanisms, change mechanisms, benefits, and portfolios along the top keep an idea of, are all the things tied together? Have we got the right resources in all the right kind of places? Hugely impactful, I think, is the answer.
Yeah. Someone's asked if you can talk a little bit about the impact of AI on change management.
I can, not as an expert. So
Yeah.
one of the things that you might consider about AI, it's very good for kind of some of the back-breaking work that you might do. So it's very good at kind of generating things where you need kind of a wider view of what's going on. So for example, you could ask it about, if you're doing a certain change, what sort of things do we need to cover? Could it design the basic structure of a training course for you? And you still would need specialists to go and fill in the detail and work out the how and the whys, whatever else. But it can do some of those kind of detail for you. If you're using so lots of the data analytics, do we use some kind of mechanized process to collect some of that data, to report some of that data, and particularly try and identify where we've got areas of strength or weakness? So it depends on what AI we're going to use, but if we've got some of that kind of back-breaking logistical stuff that we can sensibly use it for, then the simple answer is yes. You might use it to model some of the impact analysis. So you could fill in a kind of model of the organization, fill in a model of the change you're intending to do, and ask it to identify the impacted areas. Now, clearly it's got to have all the data in there in the background. Organization structures, size of the change, what do we intend to go and do, purpose of the change. But it could start to do a first cut impact assessment of who's impacted and how big is the impact. And if you give it the right parameters, it might even do the kind of complexity and criticality nature of it as well. You'd still want to go and validate that by doing a lot more kind of detailed work and maybe interviewing people. But some of that kind of general logistics stuff, absolutely, AI could help you with.
Yeah. We actually recently ran an AI and project management webinar. It was a couple of weeks ago, but that is available on YouTube now. So while it's not directly about change management, there might be some useful tips in there that you can take and start using. I think that's all of the questions we've had come through. Unless anyone has any last minute ones, we've still got a bit of time. So if you do, please do pop those in the box and we'll get to them. But otherwise, thank you very much, Andy. And yeah, just really appreciate your time today. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope you found it useful. If you do have any questions, obviously feel free to get in touch on our website. You'll also be able to find out a lot more information about the training courses on there. As I mentioned, there will be a recording of this going up on YouTube, and we'll be sending an email over tomorrow to you guys with a link to that so you can find it. Yeah, thanks again for joining. Thanks again, Andy, for the presentation, and we hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, folks. Thank you for your questions.